G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic Monday and so far a fantastic start to your week. Now, as you can probably hear in my voice, I'm still not feeling 100%, so if we take this a little bit slow, I do apologise. But today, as always, we do have a lot to go over. We're going to begin at looking at some strikes and some new or high-tech advanced weapon systems that we're seeing used a little bit more in the battlefield, as well as some strategic strikes as well. We need to look at the maps, and not only are we going to look at the maps, we're going to look at some articles about the situation on the ground and link that in with some anonymous chats of guys that I know on the ground that have been sending me over the past 6 to 8 months that line up with some of this as well. And then we need to look at what the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has said about peace and negotiations and what may then come forth by the end of the year. So look, let's start with a bridge that Ukraine has destroyed in the Kursk Oblast. So where we're looking, of course, here is Ukraine in the center and the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 14. But where we're going to move up is into the blue here. So ground made, well, normally the blue is within 2 weeks, but this is apparently another shade of blue that is showing ground that Ukraine is occupying back into Russia. And we'll talk about the importance of this and some systems in here, as this is important. So this is the area we are looking. We'll jump on to have a look at then the geolocation. What we're looking is there is a Sime River that basically runs between the blue here, the blue over here, and of course there is a Russian amount of soldiers in here as well that Ukraine is trying to cut the logistics to. Now, we have seen many bridges go down. We've seen Russian forces put up pontoon bridges. We've also seen some of those struck. But there is another permanent bridge just here that we do have footage that has been struck today. So to get an idea, this is Snagos. This is where Ukraine occupy at the moment, and around Tietkino as well. So let's have a look at this footage here, said to be HIMARS, shared by Deep State. I can't play the song, but it is a good song. So first strike, and then second strike on this. And then once this clears a little bit, you can see the amount of damage here. Remember, bridges are very, very difficult to take down. So yes, you'd be able to walk, or potentially maybe if you're a really good bloody Crusty Demons motorcyclist, get across this, but you're not taking heavy vehicles, trucks, anything across that also. Now, what we have spoken about, and I did say the other day that there may be some weapon systems that Russia is willing to use inside Kursk that they're not willing to use over Ukraine itself, from fear that these are very rare, very expensive. They may have very few numbers of these and they don't want to lose them or the technology be captured. Say the Su-57, Russia has very few numbers of those, that they wouldn't be willing to use something like that over Ukraine from not only the fear of the PR of something like that being taken down, but at the same time, the technology in that and whatever systems as well, and the potential to back engineer that, or just to actually have the information of what capabilities it does or does not have. And I said that over Kursk, we may see some more of these systems used, when I was pointing towards the only time I've seen the fiber optic drones actually be used confirmed is in Kursk, being Russian territory then itself. Because inevitably in war, things get destroyed, things get captured. And we know, because we're seeing a lot of the higher end Russian tanks earlier in the war rocking up in the US, that there's obviously interest in this. And one of my guys said this to me. Just like you said, the Russians have a larger nomenclature to work within Russian territory. So of what they are willing to use there, because if it goes down, probably more likely to actually be able to recover it. And it comes from some bits of footage, but like this. Now, this is from a Russian page, but 4-post Russian drone adjusting guided artillery shell at a Ukrainian tank somewhere in the border area. So a laser guided shell, not GPS guided, but laser guided in the air, the Krasnopol shell. The hunt for Ukrainian armoured vehicles by mid-altitude strike drones in the Kursk region indicates that the Ukrainian occupiers are in a very bad situation with their anti-aircraft umbrella, since large UAVs are easy target for medium-range air defence system. And I'll show you then the footage here, said to be from the 4-post drone. You can see then lasing this target in here and guiding that shell by relaying that information back onto target. Now, very few of these have actually been taken down, and this is very interesting here too. The Ukrainian Armed Forces destroy Russian four-post drone worth 7 million over the Black Sea. Now, again, Russia may be willing to use something like this over the Black Sea because if it goes down, the chance of recovery is much smaller than if it's being used over bloody Odessa. So that is one of the things we have speculated, and I think that goes back in with what we have theorized too. So let's talk about Latvia. Now, the Ministry of Defense of the Republic of Latvia has released this, that a Russian unmanned aerial vehicle, a UAV, crashed in this municipality in Latvia. So we're talking right here where I've dropped the pin, at least this municipality. And of course, we have Belarus here as well. It'll become more relevant. Investigating the circumstances of the incident with preliminary data indicate that it is a military UAV of the Russian Federation. It flew into our airspace from Belarus. Now, I do ask, what type of drone actually was this? Because a military-style UAV these days can be anything. It can be anything from a little Mavic thing that drops, if it can drop a grenade, that is military, or just ISR capability, all the way through to much larger drones. And it hasn't been found anywhere where I can see this. And we see a lot of pages sharing other footage of like Shahed Garan drones here, of Russian, I can't say the word, drone strikes at Latvia. Latvia is a NATO member state. So a lot of footage like this, photographs coming out of Ukraine showing this. Was it this type of drone? Because that is still significantly different than a small quad rotor, maybe with a camera on it. Now, is it a big breach? Yes, I'm not going against that, but I'm saying this is much different to something like that, including development of air defense capabilities and electronic warfare capabilities. Latvian airspace is NATO airspace. We've seen also some breaches in Romania very recently as well, but I do question, where was this actually coming from? Because it went from Belarus. So, of course, this is Russia down along here. This is Ukraine here. This is Belarus. How did it enter Latvia from Belarus? If it's coming from Russia, it's made a bit of a fucking U-turn in here. So someone stuffed up something, or again, we don't know all the bits and pieces surrounding exactly this. Now, Zelensky has spoken about Ukrainian weapons development underground as well, that we are building underground facilities for the production of weapons so that Ukrainian soldiers can defend themselves when supplies of our partners are delayed. So it is a common theme that we are seeing, especially from the Ukrainian officials and a lot of the Ukrainian support who are tracking this, that there is a massive theme of late and delayed promised weapon systems going into Ukraine. Now, if you look at the ability to get maneuver warfare kicked off again rather than this protracted attritional phase that we've been in now for, say, well over a year and a half, that Ukraine need the capability to conduct offensive operations that are simultaneous and successive, so multiple at the same time and again and again. The problem is with this sort of stop-start of aid, the Ukrainian command can't actually ever really plan long-term because it's heaps of shells, no shells, heaps of shells, no shells. And that same article we went across that was looking at why it needs to be simultaneous and successive does speak directly to that, that you can't just cache everything for one large attack. It's not going to work like that in warfare anymore. It's going to be many different attacks, but again and again. Problem is the aid has a lot of issues there. We see Zelensky and many others, from officials through to bloggers through to whoever, speaking that some of this aid that has been promised is just not arriving in a timely manner or as it has been promised. So the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said Sunday that he and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky agree that Russia should be included in a future peace conference aimed at ending Russia's war against Ukraine. He called for stepped-up efforts to resolve this conflict. And it's reported by Germany Associated Press. So they talk about in June 15 and 16 in Switzerland, of course, the Swiss Peace Summit, but left the path forward unclear. Russia did not participate. It's not that Russia didn't participate. They weren't allowed to participate. Realistically, would have they gone? No, but they didn't participate. Therefore, they weren't invited to participate. China was, but if Russia wasn't there, then they're not as well. So it sort of snowballed on. Saying, I believe that now is the moment when we must discuss how we get out of this war situation faster than the current impression is. There will certainly be further peace conference, and the President and I agree that it must be one with Russia present. Scholz is facing more political dissent at home over his government support, including money and weapons for Ukraine, after populist parties that oppose arming Ukraine did well in the state elections on September 1. So a more conservative party came in from my reading on this. At the expense of parties in his three-party governing coalition, some members of the Social Democratic Party have also called for more emphasis on diplomacy toward Russia. Of course, in Germany, with the rising cost of living that is occurring there too, some of that, of course, is actually due to the strikes against Nord Stream. There could be more discontent there with further arming and wanting then an end to the war. So it will be interesting to see how democratic countries and elections then actually influence further down the line Ukraine, Russia as well, out of Europe, out of the US. Zelensky has presented a 10-point peace formula that calls for the expulsion of Russian forces. Again, the new peace, if there's going to be something that has the guns fall silent, that peace formula, if that is the basis of where it is beginning, I don't think Russia would bother coming to the table at this point, because at this point, Russia still occupy a large amount of land. The exchange fund handback of Kursk is not enough to have a massive influence on that, to the degree of, is then Russia going to hand over the president, hand over any other then officials, and forego that land also militarily. The 10-point peace plan relies on military victory really overall through many areas. It'd be interesting to see if it's like, right, if the Western partners come together and right, this war needs to end, where it would actually be and who has more cards, who has more chips at the table currently. Then we have a look at the front line, gives you an idea of this. So let's have a look at the maps. We'll have a look at where some changes are, and then I want to talk about specific situations in specific areas. So of course we described where we are then on the map, but let's come down and have a look and see what is actually changing on this map today. So what we see, the major change here is that Vodiany has come under complete Russian control today, at least by what I'm seeing on this map, and is being reported by other maps as well. Now, what we do believe is happening here, Russia has expended so many material and men trying to get some sort of foothold in Ugledar. It is not working. We've seen a major Russia push out in this direction, and today, of course, in Vodiany, that they are trying to more envelop Ugledar here rather than have to go back through it, where they've had multiple then failed attempts at this and huge losses as well, to try and strategically take it rather than a forcible take through and occupy, if that makes sense, to force a withdrawal out of here. And we have seen this westerly push really come up over the past couple of weeks in this direction down here. Now we move up. I don't have another map showing that today, but we move up then to the Pokrovsk front. Now, not too much shift here, but you can see some grey zone grow out from Ukrainsk as well. But we just do see that there is some change in further blocks through Horovka as well, of course, in this direction of Minograd, but no massive shifts or changes in here. Things are really slowing down, as we've seen a major redeployment of forces and reserve forces be deployed into here by the Ukrainian armed forces as well. And I don't actually have another map that shows you in here, but we are going to come back specifically to this area in 1 second. But then we come up New York Toretsk front in here. No changes shown on this map, but we do have then a Noel reports map here. Now, here just showing around Toretsk, more of the area in here between Zalesny is being filled in to update his map, along with some of the grey zone in here and further towards, I guess, almost what Suryak map was showing in here. And we do have then a Suryak map update in here showing these blocks right in here that I believe is very similar to then what Noel reports are showing of further movement and further control in and around Toretsk. Of course, Suryak shows more movement from Zalesny into these blocks in the west here, but it's not being shown on these maps. So again, we take it then on notice. Now we will come down into Kherson, as many people are talking about this, but I think it does need to have a bit of a realistic view at what has occurred here. And then Suryak talks about this. The latest Russian moves in Dnipro should not be taken into great consideration. The war for the islands allows better position to attack the enemy's position on the other side and to prevent the withdrawal of forces to another front. No operation to cross the river is expected in the short term by either side because of its high cost. To cross anywhere here would be absolutely massive. We know that these are grey islands in here due to the cost of actually being there. I think a lot of the operations that are going to be taking place across here are going to be sabotage elements or elements putting in things like radio or drone repeaters to get more distance on your drones on the other side. So if you have wanting to fly a drone from here and its range is only going to be to here, if you can get an SF team put in a repeater, then you might have range well out to there, if that makes sense. So I think there's going to be a lot of that done by smaller units rather than bridges, bloody pontoons go across. It's just going to be massively costly. We'll come back up into Kursk, where we spoke about. No changes shown on this map or Noel reports as today, but we do have one on Suryak. So this can be difficult to see, but we see this Ulanok here. That it does show there's a lot of clashes taking part here just to the east of Suja. And then we look at where Borki is. Now, Borki is seen by these blue and these red dots down in here. Again, hard to get an idea exactly just because these maps, the labeling is not fantastic, but we can get an idea where we see the border turned onto this straight line. That's about halfway down here across. So it's showing right where my sort of cursor is. We'll just draw this in. So something like this has come under Ukrainian control today, but not shown across then these other maps. So very interesting to look at and talk about there. And it's not the first time we're going to speak about Kursk today, but we will come back to it. So let's then talk about the situation in Pokrovsk and what is occurring and what is coming out about some of the command issues here from CNN, from Twitter, and from guys that have been telling me about this for a long time off the ground, that people push back and go, oh, it's just made up, Willie. But then you're like, well, okay, maybe we're a few months ahead on some of this as well. So I see this come out from a Ukrainian veteran and doing a lot of voluntary work here to talking about this region and, of course, the pocket, the Novelsky pocket that is growing. Unfortunately, the situation in Donetsk region continues to deteriorate. One of the biggest issues is that the generals are completely disconnected from reality. Most don't even understand the state of our forces and don't know real situation on the ground. They try to wage war based on the numbers and statistics instead of actually understanding what's going on. We know any numbers around KIA, MIA, WIA in Ukraine is incredibly close guarded, but who actually is tracking that? Like, how close guarded up the chain of command is it? And if these are internally covered up even very high, that we've speculated before, we've talked about this, that this could change command instructions and behaviors, because the commander may think, well, this area is completely full, this unit is full, therefore, okay, we're going to send them on this mission, and can cause huge issues there. That they looked at the brigade on paper without understanding that half the brigade of people with contusions, injuries, and simply can't participate in combat. This results in a complete disconnect from the reality. And what I'm saying is here is the commander may not actually know that, depending on the reporting, because it's so closely guarded. I'm currently trying to help units to do more with less by providing equipment that reduces manpower needed for building fortifications and logistics. And we're changing situation for units on the ground, but a lot of work ahead. Sorry if this upsets you, but this has to be said. Now, Ukraine's goal for all of this has always had to have been that doing more with less. Ukraine was never going to have the manpower numbers that Russia had. They were never going to have the material numbers that Russia had. Of course, shells, men, we can just see that blatantly, that Russia was always going to have numerical advantage. It always needed to do more with less. How do you do more with less? Well, and with less manpower included too, it is all lies in defensive fortifications at the beginning. And then you can have less amount of shells, less amount of men, less amount of X, Y, and Z. And we have spoken at length about this, that the first and foremost thing over the past year and a half should have always been defensive works, defensive operations. And we have seen that that has not been to the standard of which we actually expected since the fall of Avdiivka, and actually the push through Kharkiv, I think, was the first time we really saw, oh shit, what has the focus actually been instead of this. And we're going to talk more about some of the things that I have been told about other bits and pieces as well. Some of this is from back in March, and some of it is from about a week and a half ago. So this was more recent. Emphasize, so talking of what can I share, the fact that those in charge are beyond incompetent. If they want to win, the cronyism needs to end right now and promote the majors to senior command positions. So the guys on the ground, promote them up as they know what's going on. Those in charge are utterly clueless in strategic decision making, and those below them are fucking pulling their hair out. Battalion commanders who have the fucking faith and trust of the men. These are the people who could win this war and get rid of the senior commanders and replace them with the battalion and brigade commanders. The things will change fast. At the moment, it's a fucking shit show run by buffoons without a clue. And I'm all right to then share this as well. That is from the ground. And of course, this is far further back, but get the word out, mate. The blokes are utterly, absolutely fantastic, just utterly useless command, and they can't say it. Now, furthermore on this, it's the same thing time and time again with Ukrainian command when up against the wall. This was about Chasiv Yar many, many months ago. They'll use their country's senior special forces to conduct the role of line infantry in the hopes it'll make a change. It never does, as it's not their role. From Severodonetsk to Lysychansk and Bakhmut, what should only be used at the strategic level, stuck in a trench, their top snipers wrongly utilised and unable to act as snipers. At times, at the 50-metre field of view, utterly wasted. Time and time, they aren't learning from their mistakes, but making the same ones over and over. It's unforgivable, and the boys are completely aware of this, and it's shameful. Not to forget the fact that over a year of training to be in the GUR or SBU Alpha, these people can't be replaced at the drop of a hat. So that there's some of these units being used that should be used in more strategic operations are being used line infantry by the command not knowing how to specifically use them and being wasted. And we have one more here. The VDV, the Russian paratroopers, who are led by Spetsnaz in their small teams, utilising hit and run tactics along their joint fires capability, and it's working well. They're gaining ground fast. Small, hard, fast teams going in and out. Something Ukrainians should be doing, and that's what I would do. The Russians are constantly learning and amending their tactics. The Ukrainian command needs a punch in the head for years of lazy incompetence. And I said, can I share this word for word? Sure. Something has to be said, and the boys here, they don't have a voice. That there needs to be, exactly like we see in the attritional warfare aspect, how long it takes both volunteers and conscripts, but that these units should have professional soldiers and NCOs brought in from pre-war army to add professionalism, but they're shown to be fed into the battle in secondary sectors due to the large losses and the experience that if that is lost, then of course it starts all over again, and the time it actually takes to develop someone from the bottom all the way through the top. And we're going to see this in depth across this CNN article here. A battalion commander, Dima, was in charge of 800 men, but with most of his troops now dead or severely injured, Dima decided he'd had enough and quit and took another job in the military in an office in Kyiv. He told CNN he couldn't handle watching his men die anymore. The situation is particularly dire among infantry units near Pokrovsk and elsewhere on the Eastern Front, where Ukraine is struggling to stop Russia's creeping advances. CNN spoke to 6 commanders and officers who were until recently fighting and supervising units in the area. All 6 said desertion and insubordination are becoming a widespread problem, especially among newly recruited soldiers. And this is like I just showed you, that you have to feed into secondary areas to gain experience. You put them straight on that line, you're going to have desertion. And I do not blame guys if they've got fuck all training, fuck all experience, you're getting hit by fabs. You go, I'm out, especially if you have been conscripted to be there. You haven't volunteered. And the problem is, these conscriptions, these volunteers, this can't be fixed now. It's going to take a minimum of 6 months from a mass conscription to even start seeing the effect of that. And it should have been taking place months and months, if not years ago, of mass mobilization. But we have seen Ukraine really not wanting to have a huge mobilization. He does say not all mobilised soldiers are leaving their positions, but the majority are. When the new guys come here, they see how difficult it is. They see a lot of enemy drones, artillery and mortars. They go to positions once, and if they survive, they never return. They either leave their positions, refuse to go into battle, or try and find a way to leave the army. Unlike those who volunteered earlier in the war, many of the new recruits didn't have a choice in entering the conflict. They were called up after Ukraine's new mobilisation law came into force in spring and can't leave legally until after the government introduces demobilisation, unless they get special permission to do so. Now, from my reading, my looking at comments, everything, the biggest problem with Ukrainian government's mobilisation is that there are no laws in place for demobilisation or rotation. Remember, these new mobilisation laws, these went through months ago, and all the comments under that were going, well, how do we demobilise? Like, should it be 2 years and you come off? When do you rotate? And the biggest criticism of that was, well, now the only way to demobilise is be 200, 300. So either you're wounded or killed is the only reason to come off, because there's no law on demobilisation or law on rotation, that you're there until either end of the war, killed or wounded. Yet the discipline problem clearly began way before this. Ukraine went through an extremely difficult patch during last winter and spring. Ukraine went through an extremely difficult patch during last winter and spring. Months of delay in getting US military assistance into the country led to a critical ammunition shortage and a major slump in morale. They had just no artillery to fire in some areas. This officer for the 59th Mech Brigade told CNN his unit tries to rotate soldiers in and out every 3 to 4 days, but drones, which have only increased in number over the course of the war, can make that too dangerous, forcing soldiers to stay put. The record is 20 days. Rotation is one of the most dangerous elements in this war for getting seen, targeted, and then killed. As the battlefield situation deteriorates, an increasing number of troops started to give up. In the case of the first 4 months of 2024, prosecutors launched criminal proceedings against 19,000 soldiers who either abandoned their positions or deserted. This staggering, most likely incomplete number. Several commanders told CNN that many officers would not report desertion and unauthorized absences, hoping instead to convince troops to return voluntarily without facing punishment. Remember what I say about numbers? Remember what I've said about KIA, MIA, WIA, the reporting, and there may actually be some incentivization of reporting there too, to have full units too. This approach became so common that Ukraine changed the law to decriminalize desertion in the absence without leave if committed for the first time. He told CNN the threats will only make things worse. A smart commander will delay threats or even avoid them. Speaking about the fight in Pokrovsk, that Kiev's forces are clearly outnumbered and outgunned, and some commanders estimating there are 10 Russian soldiers to each Ukrainian soldier, but they appear to be struggling with problems of their own making. That there's poor communication between different units is a major issue as well. So it can't just all be outwardly, there needs to be a look inward. And what I've been saying on here, what I've been reporting out and being told, is that there needs to be a large inward look at the command as well. You can't just blame everything on the US and support. You can't just blame everything on the Russians have more numbers, that you can do more with less for command control as well as defensive positions too. It all increases from there. There have been cases of troops not disclosing the full battlefield picture to other units out of fear it would make them look bad, and other units abandoning positions without reporting it also. So the communication is poor. And this is speaking about Kursk and a major boost to an exhausted nation. And it does say it felt weird entering Russia because this war was supposed to defend our soil and our country. But speaking to CNN, they say they appeared completely exhausted, that they had no rest between their Pokrovsk mission and the one in Kursk. And these guys are sappers, engineers, so straight off that redeployed elsewhere. Then we saw, of course, that push through from Russia. They asked if the advances in Kursk gave them the same boost as the rest of the nation. They remained skeptical. After 3 years of this war, everything feels the same. And this is one of the things I said. I said that Kursk may be a really good boost for morale in Lviv and Kiev and in the West, but if you're in Pokrovsk and you've just had guys either pulled away or you're one of those guys went from mission to mission, I don't know how much of a boost that would actually be there either. Some, like Dima, are transferring to posts away from the front lines. He said his decision is to leave the battlefield mostly down to disagreements with the new commander. That too is increasingly common. The ranks of Dima's new battalion grew thinner and thinner until the unit disappeared. So look at what I was getting sent off the front line about, where we need to move commanders around with the guys with experience who have good rapport with the guys on the ground, but problems higher up than this again. They never received enough reinforcements, something he blames squarely on the government and reluctance to recruit more people. Again, it seems that there's this reluctance from the Ukrainian government to conscript, recruit more people. I can see why, because of the huge issues that this then causes, but I can't see long term how this is going to be fixed quickly, because less and less people are volunteering. There needs to be a conscription there. You need those trenches manned. You need that backfill. You need that rotation. I don't see how this hasn't come into play in the last 6 months yet. We thought there was going to be a mass. When Zaluzny was in power, we thought there was going to be a conscription of 500,000. We have not seen that yet come. The battalion suffered painful losses in the past year, fighting on multiple fronts before being sent to Pokrovsk without any rest. Demas saw so many of his men killed and wounded, he became numb. So the situation there with command issues, with problems, is realistic. And we can't just overlook this. And I fear some of the sort of dick-riding propaganda takes away from ever actually having like an internal realistic view of what actually are the problems here, rather than it's just, fuck this other side, they're orcs, this and that it never actually comes down to. It's all idealist, not realist. Maybe I'm over-critical, over-realist on some things, but I think as far as command and analysis, I'm better off being that way than just, this is all going to go good just because I've said it. And let's have a look at Bloomberg's article about Kursk. That Russia's Kursk region impressed Kyiv's allies with a quick initial success and exposing the hollowness of Vladimir Putin's vows to defend his country at all costs. But the US and European officials still question what Kyiv's endgame for the 500 square miles or 1,300 square kilometres of Russian territory it says his forces now occupy. Some allied officials fear Kyiv could be forced to give up that land within a few months if Moscow amounts to a larger counterattack. And what we've said in here, what is the endgame of here? I still think it potentially was that nuclear power plant, and it didn't get that far. That's what I was told in the initial days of this as well. But this isn't enough to have a massive bargaining position at a peace negotiation either. It's 1,300 square k's. It's a lot, but Russia have 106,000. It's not enough of a bar. Suja is not going to swap for Donetsk or Sevastopol. That's just not going to happen. With Russian forces pressing an offensive of their own in Ukraine's east, the superior numbers to crack Ukraine's line, some European officials expressed concern that the cost of the Kursk operation may prove high. And I've asked this again and again on the Telegram, is it a net positive overall or a net negative? Not your feelings, but strategically on the ground. The Lightning campaign has revealed the weakness of Russian defences, challenging the view that Putin's 2-year-old invasion had become a grinding war of attrition, played to the Kremlin's advantages. But now what we see is it has actually maybe proved that, because this has slowed down. The maneuver element can't keep up that maneuver. That's simultaneous and successive offensive. So maybe it has actually proven more that all war eventually protracts into attritional conflict. A lack of major Russian retaliation has also bolstered Kyiv's argument that Putin's oft-touted red lines are empty threats aimed at scaring the US and Europe, as Zelensky pushes allies to allow Ukraine to use longer range weapons. Now, the red line here, this is so misconstrued all the time about nuclear weapons. The red line of the nuclear weapons, if you look at the Russian doctrine around this, is for the existence of the state. Now, was a red line crossed there and we haven't seen response to it? Yes. But when people say, oh, they're not going to do a nuclear strike, well, okay, I don't think there's going to be a nuclear strike anyway. But the nuclear doctrine was existence of the state. Suja, Kursk, no matter how you look at it, did not threaten the existence of the state of the Russian Federation either. Now, another thing you need to look at in this, that the lack of major Russian retaliation. I think strategically, the lack of retaliation by the Russian forces is actually the best way to go about it. Because if Russia do retaliate, they're going to have to get tens of thousands of soldiers up in here to retaliate and push that back. I think strategically, the best move for them is to dig in. Okay, now you hold this, and where Russia is the superior numerical numbers and Ukraine is the inferior numerical numbers, forcing then Ukraine to man a whole other area and a new front line with troops. I think strategically the best decision would be actually to do nothing and make Ukraine then man a much broader front line and rely on them withdrawing to have to use those forces somewhere else, rather than massing your own forces to then push back through. Putin has shed so much blood that red lines are meaningless now. Well, we don't know where that line might actually then be. Zelensky said Kyiv could use the territory it's taken as a bargaining chip in talks. Zelensky's exchange fund, as he calls it, for POWs and then land too. Again, yes, it can be used as that, but again, it needs to be 10 times that to be the equivalent. The no signs that Moscow is ready to negotiate in earnest. Some allies worry that Ukraine may not be able to hold it long enough to provide leverage in any diplomatic effort. So can Ukraine hold this long enough until there's diplomatic efforts? But again, my question is, in a diplomatic effort, how much leverage does this actually then have? Moscow so far hasn't redeployed large numbers of troops from the east of Ukraine to fight in Kursk. Of course, they're pushing at the key logistics hub being Pokrovsk, and Russia would would need to send many troops to Kursk in order to eject the Ukrainian forces. Like I said, I think strategically the best decision, the best choice would be just to leave it, dig in, okay, don't let it expand any bigger, but make the side with the lesser numbers have to man further. I think lengthening that is in Russia's interest if you look at just sheer quantity of forces. At the same time, Kursk incursion aims to create a buffer zone that helps protect other Ukrainian cities from Russian attacks. Now, this is from Anne Murray Daly, a researcher at RAND, has said Ukraine's move is a strategic success. This small incursion in one region, but if Ukraine wanted to, it could do it again in a different part. They're forcing Russia to reassess how it defends its entire border. Now, I don't know if it is strategic or tactical success. I think there was a large tactical success. There was initial strategic success, but at this point in time, could it be a strategic failure if it just means you have to have a much larger area that now you may have to hold as well? And this incursion was specifically chosen in this area due to the lack of responses here. And in my opinion here, I don't think Ukraine could do this again. I think the biggest success in this was that it showed a massive problem in Russia's defenses. Therefore, Russia will have to man the border again, but I don't think you're going to get that opportunity again because Russia's gone, holy shit, our border is not secure. They've managed to go 20 Ks in, but I don't think you're going to be able to just do this anywhere that you want it. And it would have been specifically in that specific area due to all the ISR assets going, this is the area if you're going to do it, to then do it. But there are little sign allies are ready to grant Zelensky's appeals to use longer-range weapon strikes inside Russia. I don't believe one capability is going to be decisive. I stand by that comment. This is from Lloyd Austin as well. So Ukraine is trying to show there's no red line. Let us use these weapons to strike inside of Russia. And the US is really, really holding that back, saying you've got your own capabilities and it's not going to make then a difference regardless. I think it would make a difference, but the US is really holding off on that. So obviously the US and its intelligence service and its whatever still do see that there is a real threat from red lines there. But also, and I've spoken about this before and I won't go into it at length, the US need to be looking much further down the line strategically as well about then a relationship with Russia. I'm not saying we're singing Kumbaya around the fire, but the US need to look at, could there be a working relationship in the future as China becomes more and more and more powerful and controlling that area of the world as well. The senior Polish defense attaché in Washington has said after initial messy response, Russia will likely push back. The question is, how long will it take to do so? Noting that maintaining supplies will be more difficult for Ukraine once winter sets in. So once winter sets in here, it's going to be very difficult for that area. Things are going to slow down, and in winter, your ISR targeting thermal works better. Your artillery is more effective because things are more statutory on the front line, and your things like FABs will work better as well. And this is something I spoke about the other day. We haven't seen FABs en masse actually used within a completely halted winter setting yet, where the planes will have little to no effect. The targeting from ISR may actually be better to see where it is. It's actually easier to see vehicles in winter because of not only tracks through the snow, but also if you drive over something with like a large vehicle, thermal will actually see that on the where it's warmed up the ground past when the vehicle's actually moved as well. So it will be very interesting to see if Ukraine can hold it in winter. And I think Russia may just hold the line in Kursk and don't let it go too far and rely on actually Ukraine pulling themselves out. Zelensky's facing growing fatigue at home and war grinds through its third year and rising concerns allied support may flag as well. Kursk operation was a risky gambit to gain leverage in talks. So last one here, Zelensky said last month he hopes to present a new peace plan to President Joe Biden soon. So again, we will see, but there is little evidence that Ukraine's forces are building deep fortifications to defend the land that they've captured. For instance, by building trenches, laying mines at Dragon's Teeth in the Kursk region. They're not really preparing for large-scale long-term defense, adding that it could be part of Kyiv's calculation to be able to retreat quickly, but also to leave open the option to continue advancing forward or to take more territory. It's one of the problems. Once you build in massive defensive works, you have to move through your own shit to actually then do further attacks. But also, I think, and I said this when Russia moved into Kharkiv on its two axis as well, that you could see a very quick withdrawal out of there if it had done what it wanted to. And I think we could see that in Kursk as well. Could be a withdrawal as quickly as then it came in. Russia has focused most of its capable forces on the offensive around Pokrovsk. Across Ukraine, months of Russian airstrikes and power plants and other energy infrastructure has triggered widespread rolling blackouts and fueled fears of a broader crisis this winter with, of course, that energy too. But the forces tied up in here away from other areas of the front too. And that's why I gave that situation sort of briefing on how A is affecting B and whose strategically has it actually worked better for. And I think if Russia just sit and hold in this, it could backfire on Ukraine, or potentially there is something else coming from this, from a simultaneous and successive campaign, but we have not yet seen that, and you can't be like teeth of up and down and up and down it needs to be. Again, say it with me, simultaneous and successive. Legends, have a fantastic day. Look after yourself, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.